Hello, everybody. It's Trent Clark, CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur, longtime coach in professional baseball, coaching in 3 World Series. And you are on Winners Find a Way with my guest, Michael Stickler. Michael, how you doing, buddy?
I'm really good, Trent. I'm really looking forward to this morning. I woke up just thinking this is going to be fun, our time together today. So
Oh,
looking
I'm,
forward to
I,
it.
I've been excited about this for weeks. You and I set this up a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, man, I got to get Michael on the show. When is this going to happen? So if you are new to the Winners Find a Way, we interview the top 1%, people that have gone through a thing or two before, talk about their challenges along the way. I love the quote from Chris McChesney and Sean McCovey from the 4 Disciplines of Execution. Winners, when shown data that they are losing, find a way to win. I love that. It's about resourcefulness. And Michael, before we get started for you, tell them where people can find you.
Best place to find my books and be in contact with me is at mikestickler.info, mikestickler.info. And there you will see my books that I have, and you can contact me directly. That is a book, or really just a web page on leadershipbooks.com where I publish my books.
That's awesome. And many more books are on
And many more.
leadershipbooks.com, which is great. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. If you are out there today feeling like, hey, you're on your path to wanting to be elite, to go through these challenges, you want to upgrade, you're an athlete, a CEO, an entrepreneur, looking to take yourself to that next level, I do believe this podcast is for you as we dig into the deep things in this show. So super excited about this, Mike. You're a Catalina kid, an island boy growing up California style. And I've been out. I got a good friend who runs out the jet skis from land to Catalina Island. An incredible experience, man. If no one's ever done that, I highly recommend it. And so you started as an entrepreneurial kid on the island. Talk to me about that.
My parents moved there when I was in 4th grade. So we're talking now back in the 60s. Moved my family, my brother and my sister, and of course my mom and dad moved over there. And I really feel honored to have such a unique life as a young boy on Catalina. I remember spending the summers running around in my little bathing suit, no shoes, no shirt, no nothing, just tan skin, running around. I would do things entrepreneurially, like haul the tourist luggage in my wagon, dive for coins. When the steamer would come in, the tourists would throw coins off the edge of or over the side, and we would dive for them. I actually made jewelry in the winter time and then sold it up and down the beach in the summertime. Even did things like went and collected the shopping carts for the local Safeway and returned them because the manager would give us 25 cents for every cart that we would return. And I just had a day, all day long. I was alone. Can you imagine being, 7 years old and running around the island completely by yourself with your friends, doing whatever we wanted while my parents were working and my older brother and older sister were doing what they did as teenagers. And I just have such great memories of it. By the grace of God, I didn't get myself into, too much danger or too much trouble. But there I learned to swim solidly. I snorkel, and now, of course, I scuba dive and have for years. And so Catalina was just a really special place. And by the way, if you grew up over there or lived there for any kind of length of time, you refer to yourself as an islander. And that's kind of very possessive, by the way. I am an islander, and the mainland is what we call over town. And so that's just some of the little language that Catalina brings. And my oldest brother, still has a business over there and still runs an ongoing tour business and whatnot. And so still have big connections into the island. Just was there last summer again after being gone for a long time. And it was fun to run into friends that I've known all these years that are still there. And
great memories.
I had to introduce myself to some of them because, hey, you know what? We're old. I don't have the hair I used to and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so
I love it. So For those who don't know, I mean, Catalina Island is what? Is it 45 miles off the coast of LA there? I mean,
No, it's
how
20. It's actually 26 miles off the
26
coast
miles.
of off the coast of Los Angeles or Southern California. There's actually a song that goes back, I think, to the 20s or 30s. It says 26,000. Sorry, 26 miles across the sea. Catalina Island is awaiting for me.
Mm,
And the island is roughly the same length as it is away, so it's about 25 miles, 26 miles long, 8 miles wide at the widest point, half a mile wide at its narrowest point. There's a city there, really just a little town that's 1 square mile, and the population has all these years roughly stayed around 2 to 3,000 people that live there full time, and it's just a unique place. It's kind of like living in a fishbowl, and it's kind of like living in paradise all at the same time.
awesome. So then you're a Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo grad, ag student, agriculture, which I love, entrepreneur most of your life, both in agriculture, other space. You started, you just kept going from the time you were a kid to other businesses. We'll talk a little bit about that. Ultimately, heading into a little master's program at Colorado State out in Fort Collins, continuing to progress this agricultural expertise. And then you become ultimately opening different businesses that you can find some margin in different ways that's outside of agriculture. What give me quickly? I mean, in addition to this, all this, meanwhile, now since 2000, you've become an author of 19 books. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So 19 books, 4 bestsellers. You talk to me about in all those years of different businesses. Talk to me about your favorite business.
Well, there was a point that my wife and I returned to Catalina. Now, I left Catalina when I was a child in middle school. My parents moved off the island to over town, and we actually landed back by Chino in California, back when it was all agriculture and that area. And that's where my interest in agriculture really kind of was planted and grown.
Yeah.
But there was a period that my wife and I had, and our children came back to Catalina when I was about 25, and I had this opportunity to purchase kind of a dormant photograph concession. Now, boy, I'll tell you, I wish I still had this business. It was just such a sweet deal. So imagine as you get off the boat to come to Catalina, enjoy the day, there's a photograph concession, and there is a marlin fish hung upside down. Now, it was a wood mock-up, hand painted, so it looked just like a real marlin, but it's hanging upside down. You got a rod and a descriptor board, where you could write the name of the boat and who was on it and all that. And you had the casino, which is the big landmark building there, and the Avalon Bay behind you.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this guy who was a hippie that ran it for me. Now, he was a certified hippie. Okay, he came from Ashland, Oregon. This guy was legit all the way.
Certified.
He would sit, yeah, certified, paper carrying hippie, and he had a bamboo flute that he made, handmade, and he would sit out there and play that song 26 miles across the sea, and basically just hawk people in to get their pictures taken. It was way back when we still had Polaroid, so we would charge $10 for a Polaroid, $5 for your own camera, and then he and I would split it. And every day he would walk into my office on the island and hand me an envelope between $300 to $500 every single day in cash. I mean, talk about a great business. I didn't do anything. All I did was just collect the money and stick it in my pocket, bank it, and yes, I reported it. But it was just such a sweet kind of business. And what I learned from that business, and it's really rooted in everything that I do, is having I call it moving parts. Having less moving parts means it's going to be more profitable for you. So if there's not a lot of I'll compare it to this. Somebody asked me one time, have you ever owned a restaurant? And I said, no, too many moving parts.
Mm.
Okay. And in a restaurant, there's just too much going on for me. I'm not saying I don't have any experience in restaurant, in the restaurant business anyway, but to me, I look at it and there's all these moving parts, and there is a much faster way, a much cleaner way to get to margin and get to profit. And that one little business taught it to me. I wished I still had it. On the other hand, I wouldn't be the guy I am today, because I'd probably still be sitting on the island on my blessed assurance, drinking beer now, and just waiting for the cash to come in. Um, you know, when I left the island, and my wife and I left the island, took our kids, we went on to back into agriculture, and we started several other businesses that some were very successful and some not so much. And I left agriculture primarily because there's a saying in ag that says, you make it in agriculture either by the womb or by the tomb. You're either born into it or you die making it. And I just remember, talk about moving parts. There's a ton of moving parts in agriculture. I just realized that I could figure out some other ways to make a living, and then do the agriculture on the side, like through investments or as a vocation or something like that, and fulfill both. And so I went on to a lifetime of being an entrepreneur primarily.
That's so great. We're going to dive into your consulting business, which was a pretty sizable one for nonprofit, based on, faith-based initiative, which is very cool. I want to dive into that. Before we do that, you've got these books you've written. Probably a lot of people may know your name, Michael, for the book you wrote about Clive. A couple other ones, Life Without Reservation, big seller. What's one thing that most people don't know about you?
I'm a horseman. Most would say, are you a cowboy? No, I'm a horseman. A cowboy is a job. And it's true that, you see somebody that's in agriculture, wears a hat, cowboy hat and all that, lives in the West. It's true that generally accepted, you would consider yourself a cowboy, or you accept the idea. But a horseman's a little bit different. A horseman spends his life trying to learn the language of a horse, and how does it interact with a human being, and how to best interact with a human being. And I as a young man, I fell in love with horses, and really just latched on to making it a lifetime learning experience. I trained under 2 Hall of Fame horse trainers, and then a bunch of others, and then I went out on my own for a period of time and trained horses. And I'm still think of myself as a horseman. I still understand agriculture. I don't ride as much as I want to these days, but other interests and other responsibilities kind of overshadow that. But most people don't know that about me. Most of them, when they see me in my everyday wear, I'm usually wearing a cowboy hat and a trophy belt buckle, and doing what I do, except for when I'm in the Caribbean. It's too hot down there.
Right.
That's another secret to most cowboys. They know that when it's too hot to wear that clothes, they strip right down to their shorts, wear their flip-flops, and show off their farmer's tan. It's okay.
All right. Let's talk about let's take you back to an overcoming time in your life, right? And let's go back to this challenge. You own this business, and you've been given a grant, to my understanding, right? Walk me through this. You have this consulting company for nonprofit businesses, primarily churches, other nonprofits, and you've got a grant from the Bush administration's
faith-based initiative.
Yeah, faith-based initiative, right? And so with that, you're going along pretty well, but then we get a change in government. We move in, and Barack Obama becomes president. The Bushes are out. There's going to be a change, and what happens then?
So several things happened. I was my company, which was a for-profit company, was awarded a grant to train nonprofits in the state of Nevada in sustainability, and it was a $1.5 million grant. So we got $500,000 each year for 3 years, excuse me. And And as you mentioned, our business was a pretty ongoing concern. We had 3 offices, only one in Nevada, one in Texas, and one in New Jersey. We employed about 25 people, and things were going really well. But what was happening in the background, and I didn't really know it, was that my business manager, the person that was running all the business, the finance, the taxes, everything, she had gone through a divorce, and she started a little at a time embezzling some money, and then more and more as it went along. And then the government noticed that it was being taken out too fast out of the grant money, and came out for a friendly visit. They just wanted to have a friendly visit with us. And and that's how they framed it. Well, I had a previous commitment in Egypt. And so I wrote them and I said, I know you're coming out, but I have this previous commitment. Is there any way that we need to reschedule it? And they're like, oh, no, it's a friendly visit. We're not worried about it. We just want to get to know who you are. And if you've got you already have this plan, don't worry about it. So I went on to Egypt. My business manager met with them, and what turned out to be a friendly visit wasn't so friendly. What they were very concerned about is how fast this money had been withdrawn. Now, people don't understand. A government grant is a reimbursement grant. You have to spend the money, meaning I had to come up with my own money up front to do the things that the grant said, and then you had to submit the receipts back to get reimbursed for it.
Okay.
People think you just were handed $1 million, and no,
Not the case.
It's not how it works at all. And so, when I got back from Egypt, I recognized there was a real problem, and this was roughly 2009. I'm going to say. Well, also what happened at the same time was the Barack Obama administration came in, and they kind of made a big deal out of the fact that the Faith-Based Initiative Office was still going, but it wasn't. It went from in January when Bush left and Obama took over, the Faith-Based Initiative Office went from 125 people to one person answering the phone sometimes. Okay. So really there was no real desire for that to go forward. Okay. And so what they were doing also was trying to close down the activities around the Faith-Based Initiative, the awards and whatnot. And so long and short of it is 5 years later, they sued me for all of the money in the grant. So they basically sued me for about $500,000 of what we had spent. And unfortunately, I'd gone into year 2 also, and I'd spent all my money going into year 2 on this grant. And they never reimbursed me for it. So I made the mistake, and I'll tell you that I made the mistake of countersuing him. And when I countersued him for the whole amount of the grant, and then I won. Okay, how did I win? By default judgment. They didn't answer my countersuit. So when I filed the first default judgment, they cried and went to the judge and said, we're the federal government. We're really busy. You can't do this to us. And so the judge gave them 60 more days to file an answer. 60 more days came and went, and they didn't answer that. So this time the judge was giving us the default and asked us to prepare a claim. And while we were preparing the claim, the government turned around and went after me criminally. And their claim is that we embezzled money. Well, at this point, I didn't see it as embezzlement at all. I didn't even realize that the money had been taken at the scale it had, because it turned out was my business manager was actually embezzling the money a little bit at a time, and it got to be more and more. And ultimately, she ran down to the government and got immunity with them before they even got the investigation going. So it got all thrown on me. Now, what happens with a criminal case is the civil case stops, and then they throw all the weight of the government on you for the criminal case, and it's hard. People don't understand. They leak to the media. They go and threaten all your friends. They call you names. You just can't even imagine. And that went on for years as they did that over and over. And I finally had my trial. She stood on the stand. I give her credit for this. She stood on the stand and said, "Yeah, these are all the checks that I wrote to myself or to my maiden name. I did it because I didn't want the banker, the teller, to know that I was taking this money." She said all that. Okay, why not? She didn't have anything to lose. She had immunity, and the jury still found me guilty. And people ask me, "Well, how could that be?" And I said, I don't understand it. I've read that transcript now, from the whole trial, because it went on for better than a week. I don't see what they saw. I don't. But nevertheless, I ended up being. They were going to send me to prison for 10 years. Okay, for what amounted to $200,000. And I hired a new legal team, probably the legal team I should have had. And they negotiated, and what they did was they negotiated with the prosecutor that if they gave him back my civil suit, which was now set for $13 million, which is what the government was going to charge me, was going to pay me. They gave that back to me, back to the government. In other words, dismissed it. That the government would agree to 27 months of me being in prison. And I didn't like it, but I have to tell you, Trent, 10 years, 360 months was scaring me to death. 10 years was scaring me to death. And so, or better than 10 years. And so I ended up making that deal with them, giving back the civil case. And then at the very last breath, after everybody signed the agreements, the U.S. attorney in Las Vegas said, "No, I want 30 months. And I just asked why. I mean, everybody agreed to this. Why now 30 months? Why 3 more months? He said, "Because I can." And so we redid the paperwork, and I accepted the 30 months. And then when I went to my sentencing, think about this for a minute. I went before a federal judge, the person that's supposed to dictate who's going to prison for how long. That was her job. And we came in there with both parties signing a 18-page, 15-page agreement that this is what the government has decided I should get. And then she just went along with it. Just like that. And off to prison I went. And now, in fairness, I didn't go. That's probably a little too grandiose. It was about a year later I went to prison, but still, I ended up at a federal camp in California, a federal prison camp. It was not a hard thing. People asked, how hard was it? What was it like? Were you scared? And I just kind of joke, and I said, "You know what? This is club fed." It was kind of like going to a Christian men's camp with a lot more cussing. It just wasn't. It wasn't a hard thing, but still, you're separated from your family. Your reputation is ruined. I still have people who just think I'm a terrible, terrible person.
Yeah.
That I was a terrible con artist. They positioned it that it was a charity fraud. I didn't run a charity. I ran a for-profit business. Okay. They all kinds of things. So by some people, I'm just looked at as the worst person in the world, and how horrible can I be? Even now, all these years later, it's been 10 years since this all happened. And yet, and you and I were kind of talking offline, where did you kind of, have your moment? Well, that first 8 months that you're locked up, you're foolish if you don't do some serious self-assessment. Okay. If you don't do some serious, you're foolish. And there's a lot of guys that don't do any self-assessment. But the fact is I was a pretty well-known guy, had a pretty ongoing business. I had 25 families dependent on me for their paychecks. All these different things were going on. And all of that was ruined and destroyed and taken away from me. And I had to just sit there and ask God, what, what are you trying to show me here?
Mm.
What are you trying to put in me or take out of me? If something isn't going the way I thought it was going to go. And um, out of that came a new perspective on the 5 areas of stewardship that each of us is called to live. And that's an area that I spend most of my life talking about now.
Let's talk about those 5. What's number 1?
So, so most of us understand. Okay, so stewardship. Let's just talk about that for a minute. Stewardship is the idea that somebody is given you something that belongs to them, but you now have full control over it, stewarding it.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody loaned you your car, or when you rent a place, a house, you are now the steward of the landlord. Okay, they own the house, but you're renting a house. Well, in the same sense, God's given 5 areas to us that we are to steward. He's actually put it in our possession to shepherd or control. The first one we're all familiar with is time. We all have a finite amount of time. It's the only one that's finite. We got 24 hours in a day, and an unlimited, we don't really, in a limited amount of time on this earth, we don't know how long it's going to be. So, what are we doing with that time? How are we actually properly stewarding that time? Now, I hear people say to me all the time, I don't have enough time in the day. Well, yes, you
Mm.
do. You do. You have the same amount of time everybody does. You're not stewarding it well based on the priorities that you should. The second one is your talent. Over time, both supernaturally and physically, you've been given some talents. You played ball, you coached ball, you those were talents that was given to you that you developed over time. I have talents as a horseman. I have talents in business. I have talents. Those were given to me and developed over time. I became a better and better steward of them. We also have what most of us are always, kind of cringe when I bring it up. It's our treasure. Okay. And that's our finances, our resources, our possessions. None of those belong to us. None of them belong to us. You say, well, Mike, yes, it does. I worked hard for it. Yeah,
Mm.
well, you had the time and the talent to work hard for us. Those first 2 were given to you by God too. You really don't own them. You might steward it better, your possessions, your finances, those kinds of things than others, but those were given to you as well. And then the 2 that most people don't even recognize, and that's relationship and knowledge or wisdom. So we also have relationships that are come into our lives and go out of our lives. The first and foremost relationship we're mostly responsible for is first with our spouse, and then with the children that God's given us. And then we have family relationships, and then we have distant family relationships, and then we have business relationships and friendships, and there's just kind of a circle that goes out more and more of these relationships. And those relationships were given to us. And those relationships have to be stewarded well. And they, based on that idea of the core circle, your spouse, your family, and out, um, which ones are you really putting the time into and putting the priority into? And then the final one, of course, is the knowledge that we have. The knowledge to help others with the things that we've learned over time, help people avoid some of the troubles, maybe help them learn how to do more in business, like what you're doing, Trent. You're putting people together. You're taking the experiences, your whole totality of your life, and you're putting them on podcasts and helping them share their knowledge out to the world. Uh, those are really crucial. And we have a tendency, especially in North America, where we try to keep our knowledge to ourselves, sometimes constantly trying to figure out how to monetize it. Or our relationships, we try to keep those to ourselves. I don't want you to meet my business partner who makes all this money. Maybe it is a good kind of fit. But that area, which I call living a life without reservation, those 5 areas, just being free with it, just having open hands to share and to give. You have to use wisdom in it. You'd be foolish to just walk down the street throwing away. Go empty out your bank account and throw it out as you go. But you have to use wisdom. But still, and if I wanted to fault, if you wanted to fault me at all, I wasn't really living those 5 areas in totality before I got locked up,
Mm.
and I want to do that now, and I'm spending my life doing that now, just trying to bless others where they can be blessed, help people get a step further in their life wherever they can, um, give wisdom where I can. Somebody asked me, well, how do you sit down and talk to you, Mike? How do you get an appointment with you? And I said, it's pretty easy. You just go on my page, tell me you want an appointment. We work out a time and I'll talk to you. I talked about just about anybody. But it depends on, sometimes on my team, somebody can help them better. So that goes back to relationships. If you want to know about design, you don't want to talk to me. I might put you in connection with Violet, our creative services director, because she can help you better.
Yeah, it's really good. So today we're talking with Michael Stickler, the publisher of Leadership Books. And Leadership Books publishes relevant with trending authors that make a difference in your business, life, and family. You can find them leadershipbooks.com. So good. Michael, take me back as an author of a number of books. You're in prison. Are you thinking like, hey, I'm going to write a book during this time? I've got to sit down and pen something. There's a couple instances that really happen. That's I mean, I don't want to say serendipitous, but there's some, spiritual movement here that happens with some things along the way that introduce you to one of your topics of your bestsellers.
So it's really quite crazy. I met Cliven Bundy in prison. I'm very candid about that. The whole book, kind of sets the scene about meeting Cliven there. Now, to understand, Cliven Bundy had been in prison. He'd actually been in what they call pre-detention. He'd been in pre-detention by the time I met him for well over a year, maybe a year and a half. Okay. And so at the end of my sentence, I'm over in California doing my time and whatnot. The very end of my sentence, they send me to the halfway house in Las Vegas, Nevada, because I'm from Nevada. Now, your listeners, your viewers may not understand, but in the federal system, at least where I was at, everyone who gets out has to go to the halfway house. So even though I don't need a halfway house, I have resources and family and a place to live and all that, I'm sent to a halfway house. I don't have a drug addiction, I'm sent to a halfway house. That's how they do it. And so I get sent to the halfway house. I'm given a furlough to go from California to Las Vegas. My wife comes and picks me up. My late wife comes and picks me up and then drives me the 4 hours over to Las Vegas, or 5 hours, whatever it was. And I check in there and they say to me, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I've been sent here from the prison to check in. Yeah, we don't have any record of you. So a few hours go by and they finally decide, okay, well, they're going to give me a bed, right? So they give me a bed. And then the next day I happen to see the program manager and I asked him, what's going on? This has got me concerned that nobody was planning on me being here. And he goes, oh, don't worry about it. It was just a computer mistake. It's no big deal. You're going to be here. You're from Nevada. You're going to be here. Check in for an orientation on Monday. I believe at that point it was either a Thursday or a Friday. So I wait till Monday. I don't leave the facility. Only thing I did was go to the gym upstairs and I didn't even go out to the outside. There's a place out there you can smoke. I don't smoke, so I didn't even go out there. And the next morning, I go down to the office to ask him what time is the orientation, and the manager's standing there, and he says, "Oh, Stickler, come here. I want to talk to you." And I walk around the corner, and there's 2 U.S. Marshals standing there with leg chains and handcuffs. And I'm like, "What's going on?" They go, "Yeah, we have a warrant for your arrest for escape." They had in their computer I was supposed to go to San Francisco. I had travel orders to go to Las Vegas. That was always the plan. The manager said to the marshals, this is wrong. This guy didn't do anything wrong. And they're like, maybe not, but we have orders. We have to take this guy back. So they put me in leg irons and put me in a van, and they take me up to a place called Pahrump, Nevada. It's a private contracted prison for the Marshal Service. People that go to that prison are people that are typically waiting for their court appearances, or they're being transferred from one prison to the other because they're in the care of the marshals, or they're under an INS hold, so they're being shipped back across the border. So I get thrown into the G12 unit, and who's sitting there but Cliven Bundy?
And if
Now,
people don't know Cliven Bundy's backstory really quickly, it was a national news story of what happened to Cliven, which was over, something very near and dear to everybody's heart right now, which is, the Second Amendment, right?
yeah.
So give us a quick background on Cliven's story of why he was detained.
So in 2014, the government came to round up his cattle and take him off the open range where his family had been grazing cattle for 157 years. And long before the Bureau of Land Management was in existence, long before the laws and rules of how they graze cattle today, and he was grandfathered in, all right. But through a long story, the BLM wanted his cattle off the land, so they got a federal judge to issue a trespass order so that they could collect his cattle and put them in a pen, and then the warrant, the judge's order was to return the cattle back to Cliven. That was the warrant. Though, just on a side note, they didn't try to do that. They actually tried to take them straight to a stockyard in Utah and sell them. They actually paid that stockyard in advance, $87,000, something I've never heard of before. Stockyards get paid a commission for the sale of the animal. You don't pay them in advance, okay? But the stockyard probably saw the government coming and got a check in advance out of them. But nevertheless, and so Cliven, really feeling very helpless and having skirmishes with the government over the years, he had a protest. So they got out their signs and they gathered family and they went out on the highway and they marched up and down and they gave speeches on a makeshift stage. And you got to remember, boy, this is out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, this is an hour and a half into the desert from Las Vegas. There's just not a lot of people around. And during those protests, maybe 50 people came on like their lunch hour because they got off work and they came down and they wanted to support Cliven. But mostly it was just him and his family until the government escalated. And when they escalated it, they brought in 200 armed federal agents. They built this giant compound. They had sniper teams surrounding his family. They had wiretapped his phone and had parabolic microphones and cameras into his home, all of which without a warrant. And on and on and on. And so it got some primarily social media attention, which raised up people all around the country, as far as away as New Hampshire, mostly from the West, but as far as away as New Hampshire, and people all responded and decided they were going to come to Nevada and protect this unfair attempt to gather Cliven's cattle. Well, that all accumulated after the roundup was over into what the government or the news called a standoff, an armed standoff in a wash and out in the desert underneath a couple of freeway overpasses. Attracted national news, driven by several different sources. Some people hated him, some people supported him, and here I am at this point. All I've ever seen is the news. I quite frankly thought he was a goofball. I thought when I first met him, he was going to be some weird conspiracy theorist. And so when I got to know him there, sitting in Pahrump, I got to talking to him, and it turns out he's just like any other rancher I've known anywhere else in the West. Just a good old boy, Vietnam era guy, loves his family and loves his life of farming and ranching. But he just wasn't going to put up with somebody trying to destroy his life. Mm-hmm. So the more I got to know him, the more I kept saying to Cliven, Cliven, somebody's got to write a story about this. Nobody's telling it. Nobody's telling your side. Nobody's telling your side. And then one day he says to me, about a week into being with him, he says, you should write it. So I thought about it. I prayed about it. And I agreed. And so what I did is I interviewed him every day for 2 months, wrote the story, did as much research as I can, and I hand wrote it, okay, on legal paper. There's no computers or anything. I wrote the story. I would fold it up every night and mail it to my wife, my late wife, on the outside, so she could type it and have it ready for me. Then after the entire interview was exhausted, we could not do any more. I felt like I had every detail. It was just about 2 months that I'd been there. That morning, 4 in the morning, the correctional officers come and say, "Stickler, roll it up. You're out of here." Just like that. No warning, no knowing, and nothing. For all I knew, I was going to be there forever for escape. Okay. What they do, they put me in a van. Just as I was leaving, Cliven, for some reason, woke up, walked over, saw me. We hugged, we cried a little bit. I thought I'd never see him again. And then I walked over, got in a van, and what they do, they drove me right back to the halfway house 2 months later. That for no reason. Never said why, never said what happened. There was no charges. And I just think it was just providential. God wanted me to be in Las Vegas to go meet this guy so I could write this book and tell his story. And I spent the next 3 months researching everything that Cliven said. And then I actually, right after that, I went home for a while, and then I came back because Cliven's trial, his criminal trial, was starting. And I was there for every day of the criminal trial. We thought it was going to go on for 2 years, and it lasted 15 days in front of the jury before the judge just finally threw up her hands and said, "I've had enough. This is wrong what you're doing to this guy," and dismissed the case. And she didn't just dismiss it, she dismissed it with prejudice. Now you guys, that's almost unheard of in a federal courtroom. Usually if you go to trial like me, you're going to prison, period. And then they're going to give you 400 years, which is what they're trying to do to Cliven. They called him a domestic terrorist. They talked about all the people that were there with guns. They talked about, it was just one big giant fabrication. But the only thing they had right was his name, but the rest of it was made up. And so I wrote the definitive book on it, thoroughly researched it. I also, once it was dismissed, the government took it back 2 years later, took it back to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I was there for that, and wrote about it. And I just felt like it was a book that needed to be told. And it was the first book I wrote that was not a Christian book. And at that point in my life.
And the title of that book is?
Cliven Bundy, American Patriot.
American Patriot. Man, that's good. So, I mean, what a crazy tale. I mean, as an entrepreneur recognizing like your fate, of like them deciding, the U.S. government deciding that, hey, you have all sorts of, for business owners, you have all sorts of expenses that go through your business: profit, loss, customers, clients, income, all sorts of different things. And to assess that now the embezzlement is of our funds, of which we only gave you 1/3, and you already spent the other 2/3, right, that you ended up not being able to repossess on, and then suing That's you right. for the total amount, which is unheard of, right?
Right.
And then losing that in a countersuit. It's just, and like you said, a little, you won, but like not exactly a win, right? Like, careful what you wish for, right? So this is probably one of the biggest challenges you've overcome in your life. And, if you had to look back on something, say quickly, maybe 2 things for people. I mean, I love the 5 things to assess very quickly, but are there any other things, like someone who's going through something right now, should be a factor, should be factoring in if you're going through the stresses and the strains of this right now? You had a heart attack during that first round of this trial.
That's right.
The stresses of it, the loss of, quote unquote, your name, your integrity being dragged through the mud and through the streets.
And possessions and money. And I mean, it was stripped of me.
Right?
Yeah. I was barely held onto my house.
So someone's going through a tough time right now. What's the first thing you think someone should do right now?
Well, the very first thing, and I want to tell you, this is a journey. The very first thing is to be honest with yourself and honest with those people that are close to you. When I was going through this trial, they made so many statements about me, and people who I knew and loved made so many statements about me.
Mm,
I even started to doubt it myself. I looked at my wife one day and I said, am I crazy? Am I self deceiving myself here? Am I really this horrible person? And I'm
yeah.
just so busily being in denial that I don't see it. And you know what? She cried and she looked at me and she said, Mike, no. But if you don't believe it, who you are, nobody's going to believe who you are.
Mm,
And she and I were close. Okay. And I use that in the past tense because later on she passed away of cancer, but she and I were close. We were best friends. Had a 4-year incredible marriage, raised great kids, about as close as two people humanly can be. She knew me. We had a thing of honesty between us, like very few people have. So the first part is be honest with yourself, and then secondly, be honest with the people that are around you.
yeah.
Right. And if you haven't been practiced at doing that, recognize there's going to be an adjustment period where people will not believe you or have a trouble understanding why you're telling them the truth now. But what's funny about truth is when you really tell the truth about what's going on in your life, the light just shines into your life, and everything can be seen, and people will deal with it. The people that love you will deal with it. And
Yes.
the people who bail on you weren't your friends anyway. Okay. And so that's the first two things to do.
Okay.
And then start evaluating. You said something at the beginning of this I so agree with, is when it isn't going well, you got to start evaluating, how can I be an overcomer in this? And so I made some steps, like I went to my church leadership and I said, look, it looks like I'm going to prison. How can we best do this? And they decided to send me, like, even though I was convicted, they decided to send me there like a missionary.
Yes.
Okay. I decided to go there to make a difference in people's lives, not to be miserable and gripe and grumble and yell at my wife over the phone and all that kind of stuff. I decided to go there to make a difference. I also decided to go there to make a difference about my own health, what caused me to have a heart attack. And the whole time I was there, I trained like an athlete. I lost 70 pounds
Mm,
and got back a fitness level I haven't had since my 30s. Why not?
yeah.
Um,
You had the
most of us,
time.
I had the time. And it was hard. I mean, my goodness, it was hard. But now I have literally a new direction in life, and I'll probably live. Back in 2012, I might not live to 20 more years, but now I can do anything I want now physically that I couldn't do before. And it's
Mm,
not just about losing weight. It's just like, as an athlete, it's about getting in shape like an athlete. No, I wasn't going to compete. I was in my 50s then, but still training like one really made a difference.
for
You know,
sure.
so so look at the assessment. Take the hard assessment of your life and figure out where it's at. And then I chose to just go where God's going to lead me with my books and the things that made me happy. And boy, am I happy now. And I'm successful at it. My books took off. Isn't that interesting? My first book hit bestseller status in 2013 before I went to prison.
Yeah. And you wrote that in what year?
I wrote that in 2011,
Okay.
and then I fought with my publisher to get it back so I could release it in 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we talk about these trials, and this trial's no joke. You versus the
sure.
federal government, right? But what I think people can really identify with is the challenge of something so close, of losing your wife. I mean, this is a 40-year marriage from heaven, blessed by God. Like that, you have this in your life. You raise your children, and you have this type of relationship that just most people don't. And yet,
Right.
cancer comes, life changes. The tables are turned, by the way. She's this big supporter for you for
That's
this
right.
for this prison. And then it's like, oh hey, the Lord says, hey, here's your turn to be a supporter. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't ask for this. I didn't
Yeah.
this
Nope.
isn't on my doctrine here. Like, I don't know, like did I push the wrong button on the vending machine? Because this isn't what I asked for.
Yeah. Yeah. And most people, not only that, but in our personal lives, we had gone through this big trial. We finally were out of it. Our lives were starting to get rebuilt. We were starting to make a living again. Things were kind of starting to move pretty well. And then COVID hit, and then March of 2020, she had what was kind of like a stroke incident, which turned out to be glioblastoma cancer, brain cancer. It's a rare cancer, and it's terminal. And they told us that she would have 11 to 14 months to live. They called that she lived 11 months, and so we went through mourning together and through the whole process together of saying goodbye. And during that time, I talked to my pastor and I said, "Man, send me back to prison. That was way easier than this.
Oh
This
yeah.
is the hardest thing I've ever gone through." And towards the end, you have to be an advocate for her because our medical system is so siloed.
Hmm.
They won't talk to each other. You have to be an advocate. You got to be a friend. You got to be a strength and a supporter. You have to be that around to your children and to your grandchildren, to the neighbors, everybody that's around you while you go through this process of saying goodbye to the love of your life.
Mm.
Um, and those last 6 weeks, once she went into hospice, um, was a whole nother thing. It was something like I never played professional sports, but I played sports in high school, and I remember back in the 70s, we had Hell Week, it
Yeah.
was really 3 weeks. Okay. But, you know, basically in those days, they would run us until we threw up every single day. That was the plan.
Yeah.
And I
Two a
remember
days.
how, yeah,
Yeah.
2 a days and 3 a days. And I remember how hard that was. And that last 6 weeks was very much like that, where I was up 24 hours a day, even though I was fortunate that I could afford, care for her, having hospice nurses in and CNAs in and all of that. I lived out of town on a ranch, so they had to come away. But I slept right next to her in the den, and got up 2 or 3 times a night and took care of her. And we just, this whole process. And I remember going, man, I have never been so exhausted, never so, physically, emotionally drained. It was 3 a days for 6 weeks,
Mm.
and then losing her. And the way I kind of related is I had this great story in my, I'm an author, so I think like a book, So I had this great book that I was reading, and then I get to this chapter, and this chapter ends, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not see this story going this way. And a lot of people, including when he lost my mom, they just stopped reading.
Mm.
Okay. They just stopped living. And he lost her at about the same time, that age time that Kim and I were. And I decided I'm going to read forward. Where's this going?
Mm.
And I've been pretty happy with the way the story's coming out
Yeah.
so far.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't know where else it's
yeah, I
going,
mean,
but
listen, I gotta tell you, like, the time I've ever heard, like, "Take me back to prison," like, said nobody ever, right?
right, right.
And yet
Yeah,
this is the
exactly
the
right.
the challenge and trauma that, is life, right? This is the
Yeah.
challenge, and I gotta tell you, Mike, this has been so good, man. I'm so thankful. Like, for everybody out there, just a couple of refreshers here. 5 things. We have 5 things in our life without reservation, right? To live this life. Time. It's
Right.
finite. Talent. You have talent. You've been given them. Like I say this in business a lot, Michael. I mean, a lot of people that are very talented people that are not doing well. They're not contributing in their role.
Right.
And the thing that they're doing is they're in a role that doesn't execute on their talents, right?
That's
And
right.
so they're trying and they're doing their best even sometimes, right? But at the end of the day, they're in wrong seat, right person, wrong seat.
Right.
Treasure. Listen, we have things we value, but they're certainly things that the real treasures in this life aren't possessions. Our relationships with others so important, and just that constantly lifelong learner. What we preach, just wisdom, knowledge. You can't get enough. Mentorship, find them, get these people,
Right.
because what I always say to people, like, hey, listen, if you gain the knowledge, nobody can take that away. Like
That's right.
they can put you in your prison. You didn't lose your college education. You didn't lose your
Nope.
ability to earn. You didn't lose any of that from everything that was taken away from you because you had the knowledge, and so you just can't take that away from you. And first of all, that in that challenging time, get really right with honesty and being very open and honest about the challenge you're facing and your part in it, and owning and taking ownership in your role in this challenge, and then before you start talking about what you're going to do about it, especially those closest to you. So I love that, going
Trent,
through that.
I was thinking, kind of relating it back to baseball. One of the things that's cool about baseball is you guys keep records on everything,
Everything.
everything. And so if your batting average has dropped, you would be stupid to not look at it,
Right.
and say what's going on. But that's what we do when we get into this denial, when there's a challenge, when things aren't going well. We don't want to look at the stats. We won't do a honest to God, difficult self-assessment to find out where am I at? And then how can I improve?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things, and we talk about some of those four losing behaviors, right? When it happens, when all of a sudden you're losing, and one of those losing behaviors is denial. Like, hey,
Right.
Michael's got 18 points, Trent's got one, and I'm like, no, I'm doing fine. No, 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 you're losing. Like this is
Right.
good,
Right.
and we're like, no, I'm. The coach is like, hey, Trent, keep up your bet. You're doing great. Like, you're not doing great. Like, let's stop lying to kids. They know when they're down 18-1, it's not going great.
Right.
And so, really quickly, I want to wrap with this. Is there a go-to, saying or verse that you're like, man, when things kind of get off the rails for me, when things are kind of getting off my life, this can level me very quickly, get me back online, take me back to foundational, Mike, and where I need to be.
Yeah, it's a Bible verse. It's Galatians 5:1. And it says, "It was for freedom that Christ set me free. Therefore, do not return to the yoke of slavery." Now, in
Mm,
that verse, the Apostle Paul is speaking to the Galatians about legalism, but it applies, when we find ourselves, when we're in trouble and things aren't going right, we feel like we're enslaved. We feel like we can't move. We feel like we're restricted. We feel like we can't be at the top of our game. That's not how we're supposed to be. That's not where we're supposed to be. And when you are feeling that, okay, you've returned to the yoke of slavery. Get out of it. If you got to completely reinvent yourself, then do it. Okay. So that you can live a life that's free and wonderful and joyous. And I don't mean heaping treasure on yourself. I mean living a life that you can give it away however you
yeah.
want.
Well, and I could apply that to your five too. The yoke of the yoke of slavery of time. Giving
Right.
people time that you shouldn't be giving, that you shouldn't be giving up. The yoke of slavery of talent. I'm spending all this time outside my talent, and now it's just I feel terrible about it. The treasure, we slaves toward money or a possession I just have to have that we find out
That's
never
right.
really gave us what we wanted. Relationship, the slavery of that being in really irregular and toxic relationship, and all of a sudden going, I'm a slave in this relationship. Like, you chose it and you keep choosing this
Yeah.
slavery, and and the wisdom, like, I refuse the knowledge, right? For me, Mike, as we thought about this week, I want to wrap with this. It was so important, that I always find something that speaks to me. And I heard this verse this week from Psalms 145:8 and 9. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and
That's right.
abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. And all of us has been made by him. So we are all under that mercy, right? All the time. And it doesn't always feel like that every day. But here's a man who's gone through it. He understands that mercy is still there every day for
That's
him.
right.
Mike, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. It has just been awesome, and so grateful you could be here.
Trent, it is a joy, and the work you're doing is making a difference. And so keep moving forward with the grace of God.
All right. Thanks for everybody. Join us next time on the Winners Find a Way show every Friday, 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. And